All right, welcome back and welcome again to Good Choices. So, first thing I'm going to do here is adjust my volume. Volume was really bad 2 videos ago, so I don't want that to be a problem. That looks a lot better. We're in the green here, a little bit in the yellow if I kind of speak up. We do have this issue where only one side is going up, so I apologize if this um, is not in mono. Um, I would like this to be in mono, but I don't see how I can set it to mono. Oh, here it is. Here it is. Mono. So, yay. Okay, okay, okay. So, um, audio input capture, mono. There we go. Now we see. Okay, perfect. Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay, so we're in mono now. Apologize for being in stereo. The last one, if you had your settings to stereo, you'd only hear it in one ear. So I got that figured out. So let me go to the last video I did because it has the next video down here. All right, and I've still got ChatGPT. I've got plenty of ChatGPT 4. Might not need it though. So last video we went over the legacy version of Grub. We also talked about installing Grub 2, which is the modern version. So now we're going to talk about configuring Grub 2. The default configuration file for Grub 2 is /boot/grub/grub.cfg. This file is automatically generated and manual editing is not recommended. To make changes to the grub configuration, you need to edit the file /etc/default/grub and then run the update.grub utility to generate a compliant file. Note, update-grub is usually a shortcut to grub-mkconfig-o/boot/grub/grub.cfg, so they produce the same results. There are some options in the file /etc/default/grub that control the behavior of grub2, like the default kernel to boot, timeout, extra command line parameters, etc. The most important ones are grub_default equals the default menu entry to boot. This can be a numeric value like 0, 1, etc. The name of a menu entry like Debian or saved, which is used in conjunction with grub_saved default equals, explained below. Keep in mind that menu entries start at 0. So the first menu entry is 0, the second is 1, etc. So this is um, uh, menu entries. I'm not sure what a menu entry is. So you know what? I'm gonna go ahead and ask the AI. So I'm gonna say, what is a menu entry? What is? Oh, I wish I could do voice. I can't. A menu entry. So a menu entry refers to an item in the boot menu presented by the Grub bootloader. When you start your computer, Grub displays a menu that allows you to select which operating system or kernel you want to boot into. Each operating system or kernel listed in the Grub menu is represented by a menu entry. These menus provide options for different configurations or versions of the operating system. For example, if you have multiple Linux distributions installed in your computer, each distribution will have its own menu entry for the grub menu. A typical menu entry contains the name of the operating system or kernel along with additional parameters or options that can be passed to the operating system during boot. These parameters might include things like kernel parameters, boot flags, or specific configurations for that particular menu entry. So I've seen the grub menu plenty of times, but if anyone watching this is confused and not familiar with what I'm talking about, let's take a look at some pictures of the grub menu. So here's the grub menu version 2.0 for Ubuntu. We can see we've got the ability to select our operating system. It looks like the only one we've got on there is Ubuntu. Then we can select advanced options for Ubuntu, and then we have some like memory tests we can do. So the grub loader doesn't only have operating systems in it. The grub menu, you can, in addition to selecting operating systems, you can select utilities, like a memory test utility. You can do recovery environments. So it's like, you're loading up operating systems, and you can have, different versions of Linux. You can have Windows instead of Linux. You can have Apple. But you can also have kind of like utilities. So grub is not as simple as just selecting your operating system. There are other things you can do, like memory tests, and even when it comes to just selecting an operating system, you can do advanced things like make edits to the kernel options for the operating system. It looks like there's even like programming you can do on the grub menu. I've never seen that before. But yeah, these are right now. I'm just showing screenshots of grub menus just on Google. So if you've never seen one before, these are grub menus, and they're probably all 2.0. So the next option in the /etc/default/grub file that controls the behavior of grub2 is the grub_save default equals. If this option is set to true, the grub_default equals is set to saved. Then the default boot option will always be the last one selected in the boot menu. So the first one, if you got multiple operating systems, you can select which one you want to boot by default. The next one, you can say that if you select a new one, the one you select will be the one that's default next time you boot up. And that could be a really useful one to have on, because then you don't accidentally boot up to revert and boot up to the other one the next time. Especially if you're doing something like, let's say you want to upgrade to Ubuntu, but you still want that old one on there in case you need it. Something's not compatible, you can roll back real easily. So like that's one thing you could do with the grub menu is have it so that you can experiment with upgrading your system, and if it just doesn't work out, things aren't compatible working the same way, you can instead boot up to the old version and be on your merry way. Okay, so grub_timeout equals the timeout in seconds before the default menu entry is selected. If set to 0, the system will boot the default entry without showing a menu. If set to -1, the system will wait until the user selects an option, no matter how long it takes. grub_cmdlin command line _Linux equals. This lists command line options that will be added to entries for the Linux kernel. grub_command line _Linux default equals. By default, 2 menu entries will be generated for each Linux kernel. one with the default options, and one entry for recovery. With this option, you can add extra parameters that will be added only to the default entry. Grub underscore enable underscore crypto disk equals. If set to Y, commands like grub dash m make config mkcnfig update dash grub and grub dash install will look for encrypted disks and add the commands needed to access them during boot. This disables automatic booting grub underscore timeout equals with any value other than -1 because a passphrase is needed to decrypt the disks before they can be accessed. So let's take a look at that configuration file on my home lab. Just clear out everything I've got and then do cat /etc/default/grub. There we go. And we've got the file. It's not that long. So let's do some greps and filter out for these options. So we're going to take a look at what the default grub option is. Alright, so on my home lab, it looks like I don't have a default grub option. There was no match for that, which is interesting. Oh, no, I do. Well, why didn't it match? DEFAULT? Oh, it's because I didn't enter in grep. I just did pipe grub default instead of pipe grep grub default. Alright, now we've got it. It's set to 0. Let's take a look at the next one, saved default. And there's only one operating system anyways. So, is D twice? Save default. Okay, this is interesting. So save default actually isn't on there. Yep, so I'm missing that option, save default. I wonder if I can just add it later on if I need it. So it says if you change this file, run update grub afterwards to update it. For full documentation of the options in this file, see info-f grub-n simple configuration. So let's do that. Alright, and then let's take a look if the saved save default command is in there. So I'm going to do a pipe grep save. There we go, and we can see the save default option is in there. So it's really easy. Now this is a program here, so we can actually do a search if we do a slash and then type saved SAVED. And now, without using that grep and having to not be in this this tool we're using here to read this file, that it has pagination, line counting, a lot of really good stuff in it. If we use that slash, now we can search. It's like a control F basically, and we can see saved default. When this option is set to true, then when an entry is selected, save it as a new default entry for use by future runs of grub. So, yep, really easy way to see what you can put in this file. Now, one thing I want to stray a little bit and demo is so let's switch over to that directory. So it's /etc/defaults and then grub is the file. So if we do an ls, we can see all these files here. Let's do an ls-al. Now we can see grub is a file. There's no D here. So I want to demonstrate what you do when you change these. So if I cat grub, it's going to say if you change this file, then you run update grub afterwards to update. Okay, but that's not all you need to do to change a file. The best practices when changing a file like this, because you're not going to remember what the original settings were in the file, and you're just going to blow them away, and then say you made a mistake or things didn't go right. what did that file look like before I changed it? I don't remember. So to avoid that situation, that's a horrible situation. You don't want to be in that situation. What you do before you change any file is you do copy CP, the file you want to change, and then you make a new file, you copy it to a new file, and you can call it anything you want. .bak I think is standard, used a lot of way. You can say .backup. It does not matter what you say. I'm going to call it .backup, and I'm going to do a sudo on it. There we go. And now if I do the ls, you can see we've got grub, and we've got grub.backup. So now let's say I make some changes to grub. So I'm going to go vi grub. Now I can uncomment, comment, change this whole file. And let's say the changes were not what I wanted. So instead of panicking, instead of desperately Googling or trying to use ChatGPT to try to figure out what the file was like before I change it, instead of desperately going through my logs, assuming I even have them set up, all I need to do is copy grub.backup to grub. And I need to do sudo. And now we've got that file set up back to the defaults that it was at before you changed anything. So this is absolutely essential. You need to be doing this. Now I made a special. I messed up and I made a file named group GRUP. So I'm gonna delete that file. Typically in like the these kinds of directories, you need permission. You need super user permission to make changes, because these are like really critical directories where you can really mess up your system. So it's like locked down pretty much. Yeah, everything is good. We still got this grub.backup file, which is fine. Now, if you're not going to change anything, you don't really need that. If as long as so I'm going to remove it on my system. But because I'm using the default settings in grub that came with the system, I'm not changing anything. The moment I change away from what this file is the moment I want a record of what this file was before the changes are made. And that's the moment where I want that grub.backup to exist on my system. So let's say I got that grub.backup going, and I made my changes to grub. Now let's say I need my changes again. So same thing, you can make a grub.backup 2 or continue that strategy. You don't have to just do it once. You can do it every time you make changes, and you want to preserve what it looked like before you made those changes. And let me tell you, every time you make a change to a critical config file, you want to be doing that. That's just best practice when it comes to Linux administration. And I'm kind of disappointed that it hasn't really mentioned that at all yet. Maybe it'll mention it later, but that's something I learned when I was in school for this. So I just want to state that and say how important it is. And I want to state how easy it is to convince yourself that, oh, I don't need to do that because I'm just in a lab. Oh, it's just a simple change. Don't do that. Like, just get in the habit. Best practice. It's like wearing a helmet on a bicycle. Do it every single time before you do anything. If you do that, you're going to be a good system administrator. If you don't do that, you're going to constantly be making mistakes. You're not going to know how to revert them, and you're just in for trouble. So get into this habit. It's absolutely essential. And during the course of my work on this, I will make sure to do that. And Call me out in the comments if you see that I ever forgot to do that. Please, 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 because it's just that important. So if you want to leave a negative comment, leave one saying that I forgot to make a backup of a configuration file before I made changes that strayed from the default. All right, so the next one is grub underscore timeout equals. So this is the timeout in seconds before the default menu entry is selected. If set to 0, the system will boot the default entry without showing a menu. If set to -1, the system will wait until the user selects an option, no matter how long it takes. Grub underscore cmdline underscore Linux equals this lists command line options that will be added to entries for the Linux kernel. Grub underscore cmdline underscore Linux underscore default. By default, 2 menu entries are generated for each Linux kernel, one with the default options and 1 entry for recovery. With this option, you can add extra parameters that will be added only to the default entry. Grub underscore enable crypto disk. If set to Y, commands like grub-mk config, update-grub and grub-install will look for encrypted disks and add the commands needed to access them during boot. This disables automatic booting. Grub underscore timeout equals with any value other than -1 because a passphrase is needed to decrypt the disks before they can be accessed. All right, and I don't need to go over all of those options. I made my point with backing up, and we already looked at this file extensively, and we also looked at how to see the full documentation of options for the file. So the next section is managing menu entries. When update-grub is run, grub2 will scan for kernels and operating systems on the machine and generate the corresponding menu entries in the /boot/grub/grub.cfg file. New entries can be manually added to the script files within the /etc/grub.d directory. These files should be executable and are processed in numerical order by update-grub. Therefore, 05 underscore Debian underscore theme is processed before 10 underscore Linux and so on. And that's because the files are processed in numerical order. So 05 is a smaller number than 10. These are standard decimal numbers. So 5 is less than 10. So the Debian theme executable file is processed by the update-grub command before the Linux file. Custom menu entries are usually added to the 40 underscore custom file. So it looks like these are meant to run last. 40 looks like a fairly big number here. The basic syntax for a menu entry is shown below. So we've got menu entry, then we've got, it kind of looks like a, I don't even know what it looks like. I'm going to ask the chat GPT. I'm going to say, what programming language or other standard, so what programming language or form of notation does this look like? What programming language or other syntax form does this look like? All right, the context. So let's see. The content you provided resembles the syntax used in configuration files for the grub grand unified bootloader, which is commonly used in Linux systems to manage the boot process. The specific syntax you provided is written in a configuration language specific to grub, also referred to as grub configuration syntax. It is used to define menu entries, specify boot parameters, and set up the configuration for booting different operating systems or kernel versions. In this case, the content you shared represents a menu entry configuration where each line specifies a different aspect of the boot process, such as setting the root device, specifying the kernel and initial RAM disk location, and defining boot parameters. It is worth noting that this syntax is specific to grub and is not tied to a particular programming language. It is a textual configuration format used to instruct the bootloader on how to boot different operating systems or configurations. Perfect. Okay. Yep. So the syntax is we've got menu entry, then we've got text string in quotes, and then we've got these curly braces. So it looks like a programming language, but it's a special syntax that is particular to grub. It's not like C or JSON or anything like that. The first line always starts with menu entry and ends with an open curly brace. And I'm gonna do this too. I really love this kind of question. So I'm asking the AI. So I call this character an open curly brace. Is there an industry standard slang term I could use that is easier to say and that will be universally recognized in the context of Linux? Okay, so in the context of Linux and programming, the character, which I used to call open curly brace, is commonly referred to as an open brace or simply a brace. This term is widely recognized and understood within the programming community and is consistent with industry standards. While there might not be a specific industry slang for this character, using open brace should effectively convey your meaning and be easily understood by others. So I'm going to say, okay, brace it is. There are also these characters. And now I'm doing the open square bracket, and then the open parentheses. What is the best word to use for them? Okay, so the characters you mentioned has specific names within the context of programming syntax. So the square bracket, square bracket and parentheses. So so you can use brace, you can use bracket, and then you can use parentheses for words. So I'm going to say parenthesis is has 4 syllables and thus is cumbersome to say. Is there another way to say it that is universally recognized in the context of programming and Linux? perhaps as a slang term. Okay, so there isn't a widely recognized slang term for parentheses. Paren. Okay, in Linux you can use the term paren, so that's half the number of syllables. Um, Paren is sometimes employed as a slang term among programmers. However, it's important to note that the term may not be universally recognized or understood by all individuals, especially outside of programming circles. If brevity is a concern, you can opt to use open paren or open round bracket. Round bracket. Yeah, round bracket is only 3 syllables. Parentheses is 4. So I think I'm going to say at square bracket and round bracket and brace as alternatives, which are more concise than open parentheses. So yeah, I'm gonna do that. So the first line always starts with menu entry and ends with brace, uh, an open brace. The text between quotes will be shown as the uh, entry label on the grub2 boot menu. The set root parameter defines the disk and partition where the root file system for the operating system is located. Please note that on grub2, disks are numbered from 0, so HD0 is the first disk, SDA under Linux, HD1 is the second, and so on. Partitions, however, are numbered starting from 1. In the example above, the root file system is located at the first disk, HD0, first partition, which is comma 1, or SD1. Instead of directly specifying the device and partition, you can also have a grub2 search for a file system with a specific label or UUID, which is a universally unique identifier. For that, use the parameter search -set equals root, followed by the -label parameter and file system label to search for, or -fs UUID, followed by the UUID of the file system. You can find the UUID of a file system with the command below: ls-l /dev/disk/by-UUID, universally unique identifier. Let's look at that on my system. Alright, so here's the universally unique identifiers. Looks like they've got 4 in the example. I've got 6. And here, now this is interesting. Here's my SDBs. I'm pretty sure I have like an SDC on there. So now I'm seeing my SDBs. If I do LSBLK, oh, I do see my SDBs. Oh, you know what that SDB is? It might be the yeah, I think it's the USB thumb drive that I plugged into it the other day, because we can see it's only like 30 gigs, so it's a really tiny thing. It's not like another terabyte or 800 gigabyte disk. So yeah, this is that thumb drive I plugged in. In the example above, the universally unique identifier for /dev/sd1 is this giant string. Should you wish to set it as the root device for grub2, the command would be search -set equals root -fs -uuid, and then that string. When using the search command, it is common to add the --no-floppy parameter, so grub will not waste time searching on floppy disks. The Linux line indicates where the kernel for the operating system is located. In this case, the VM linuz file. So we know that this is an encrypted version of the kernel because of this Z. Otherwise, it would be X if it weren't, sorry, not encrypted, uh, compressed, zipped, compressed. This is a compressed version of the file, not necessarily encrypted, but compressed, zipped. It's a version of the file that's meant to be smaller by using compression techniques on the file, and we know that because of this Z. So in this case, the LIMUZ file at the root of the file system. After that, you can pass command line parameters to the kernel. In the example below, we below. I like below because it's like it could be a below, or you know what? Instead of in the example, that's a good. I like that word. In the example below, below, BELOVE. So it's like not below, and it's not above, or maybe it's both. Anyway, I'm getting distracted. In the example above, so the example up, we specified the root partition root equals /dev /sd1 and passed 3 kernel parameters. The root partition should be mounted read-only, RO. Most of the log messages should be disabled, quiet, and a splash screen should be shown, splash. The initrd line indicates where the initial RAM disk is located. In the example above, the file is initrd.img, located at the root of the file system. Note, most Linux distributions do not actually put the kernel and initrd at the root directory of the root file system. Instead, these are links to the actual files inside the /boot directory or partition. The last line of a menu entry should contain only the brace character, the close brace character. Alright, next section is interacting with grub2. When booting a system with grub2, you will see a menu of options. Use the arrow keys to select an option and enter to confirm and boot the selected entry. Tip: if you see just a countdown but not a menu, press Shift to bring up the menu. To edit an option, select it with the arrow keys and press E. This will show an editor window with the contents of menu entry associated with that option as defined in /boot /grub /grub.cfg. So let's take a look at my system, what kind of things we would expect to see. Alright, so we got things commented out, things that aren't commented out. So let's look for something that starts with menu entry. So I'm gonna do a vi on that file, and then /menu entry. Alright, so we've only got one. Okay, / just shows the first. Wait, I'm confused here. Why? I don't see menu entry. In fact, this looks. Oh, here we go. I see menu entry. So, yep, we've got one for Ubuntu. Then I don't see the brace. Oh, here's the brace. Okay, there we go. So we've got one menu entry there. We've got one for advanced options for Ubuntu, and then those are the only menu entries I see so far. Looks like there's another one. Yeah, so we've got all kinds of menu entries. All right, but moving on. After editing an option, type Control plus X or F10 to boot or Escape to return to the menu. To enter the grub2 shell, press C on the menu screen or Control plus C on the editing window. You will see a command prompt like this: grub and then the greater than sign. Type help to see a list of all available commands, or press ESC escape to exit the shell and return to the menu screen. Note, remember this menu will not appear if grub underscore timeout is set to 0 in the /etc/default/grub. So let's see what my timeout value is set to. Alright, so my timeout value is set to 0, so I won't get that menu when my machine boots up. Alright, next section, booting from the grub2 shell. You can use the grub2 shell to boot the system in case a misconfiguration in a menu entry causes it to fail. The first thing you should do is find out where the boot partition is. You can do that with the command ls, which will show you a list of the partitions and disks grub2 has found. So just like in a Linux shell, you can use ls to look at the files. You can use ls in a grub shell, but it doesn't show you the files and directories. Instead, it shows you the partitions and disks. In the example above, things are easy. There is only one disk, HD0, with only one partition on it, HD0, comma, MSDOS1. The disks and partitions listed will be different in your system. In our example, the first partition of HD0 is called MSDOS1 because the disk was partitioned using the MBR partitioning scheme. If it were partitioned using GPT, the name would be GPT1. To boot Linux, we need a kernel and initial RAM disk, initrd. Let us check the contents of HD0, MSDOS1. Alright, so you can specify the partition and hard disk you want to look at. You need to use a syntax round brackets, then the hard drive, and then comma, and then the partition, and then close the round bracket. So that's in the grub shell, so I can't demonstrate that on my home lab unless I go into the grub shell, and that would be too difficult for me right now. I wonder what happens if I type in grub. Would I go into the grub shell? Nope. Okay. You know what? I'm curious enough. I'm going to ask ChatGPT, how do I get into the grub shell? How can I get into a grub shell from a fully booted up Linux system on a bash prompt? You can't. You have to reboot it. Because remember, it comes from a different, it comes from the BIOS or the UEFI, which is stored in a completely different, it's in a completely different section of the system. So you can't just move over to that section from the, you're handed off. It's like a relay race where they hand off a baton between the runners. It's like you already handed off the baton to the OS, so you can't go back and hand it back. You've got to start the race over if you wanna do it. If you want it to work, otherwise you're not gonna win the race. So like the system's not gonna work if you allow for that. So unfortunately, there's no way to get into that grub menu unless you reboot the system and access the grub menu with the hardware that is associated with the boot process. Once the baton is handed off, now as we said, you can go back and forth with that partition for certain things, like for example, some demons that are always up when the system is up. They interact with that, but things like shell commands, you don't. There's no reason to go back into the grub regularly enough for it to be justified to be able to access it from Bash. All right, so you can add the -l parameter to ls to get a long listing similar to what you would get on a Linux terminal. Use tab to autocomplete disk, partition, and file names. So very similar to regular Bash, except you're not listing files and folders, you're listing disks and partitions, but you can still use -l to get more detail about those disks and partitions, and you can still use tab to autocomplete the disk partition and file names. So it looks like you can get file names still. Note that we have a kernel VM linuz, so it's compressed, and initrd.img images right on the root directory. If not, we could check the contents of /boot with list, and then round brace hd0, which is the drive, comma msdos1, which is the partition, and close round brace /boot/. Now set the boot partition. So we're in the grub shell. The command to do that is set, and then the parameter fed to the command is root equals open brace, open ROM brace, hd0, comma msdos1, end round brace. Load the Linux kernel with the linuz command. Sorry, linux command. So in this case, the kernel can't be compressed because we're going to be passing it to this command to be used. So it has to be uncompressed. So it's going to be linux as opposed to linuz because it's no longer compressed. Followed by the path to the kernel and the root equals option to tell the kernel where the root file system for the operating system is located. So we're in that grub shell. Now we're using this command linux, and then okay, never mind. Actually, this is just the command. So the command is Linux, and the command is a command that loads the Linux kernel. So when we run the command Linux to load the Linux kernel, the next thing we need to feed it is the location of the Linux kernel. In this case, it's / and then VM linuz. So here we still have that compressed file. The command has nothing to do with whether your kernel is compressed or not. It's the name of your kernel file, whether it ends with an X or a Z. So you can see actually we can use that compressed file. We can feed the compressed file to that Linux command that is used to load the Linux kernel, which is great because we can have more storage space available. We don't have to waste storage space with an uncompressed file. We can just feed the compressed file directly into that command. And then we need to include the path to the kernel, and the root so we did that with /VM linuz, and then the root equals option to tell the kernel where the root file system for the operating system is located. And we remember this from earlier, like at the very beginning. Pretty much, they talked a lot about this root option. So this is where you can. This is one of the places you can enter that in at the grub menu, and it tells the kernel where the root file system for the operating system is located. In this case, it's located in /dev/sda1. Okay, so load the initial RAM disk with initrd, followed by the full path to the initrd.img file. There we go, we're in that grub shell again. initrd slash initrd.img. Now boot the system with boot. So here, they don't have that listed there, but you would just enter boot. And now you're booting the system with an initial RAM disk that we specified here. So we use the initrd to include the RAM disk, and then we include the path to the image file for the RAM disk. And then before that, we used the Linux command to load the kernel, and we fed it the kernel, the root file system, the path where we're going to find that root file system. And then even before that, we set the boot partition using this set command. Alright, so booting from the secure shell. In case of a boot failure, grub2 may load a rescue shell, a simplified version of the shell we mentioned before. You will recognize it by the command prompt, which displays as grub rescue. So that's different from the command prompt up here. The command prompt up here just says grub, but you will know you're in the rescue shell when it says grub space rescue. The process to boot a system from this shell is almost the same as shown before. However, you will need to load a few grub2 modules to make things work. After finding out which partition is the boot partition with ls as shown before, use the set prefix equals command followed by the full path to the directory containing the grub2 files, usually /boot/grub. In our example, here we go, grub rescue set prefix equals and then /boot/grub. Perfect. Now load the modules normal and Linux with the insmod command. So we're doing that. We're in grub rescue mode. We're doing insmod normal, and then the next command insmod space Linux. Next, the boot partition with set boot equals as set root. So set root equals as directed before. Load the Linux kernel with Linux, the initial RAM disk initrd, and try to boot with boot. Alright, grub legacy. Installing grub legacy from a running system. To install grub legacy on a disk from a running system, we will use the grub-install utility. The basic command is grub-install device, where device is the disk where you wish to install grub legacy. An example would be /dev/sda. Okay, so we got grub-install /dev/sda, and this is the basic command where we are and where we're deciding to install grub legacy. Note that you need to specify the device where grub legacy will be installed, like /dev/sda, not the partition, as in /dev/sda1. By default, grub will copy the needed files to the /boot directory on the specified device, independent of which partition that happens to be in. If you wish to copy them to another directory, use the --boot -directory equals parameter followed by the full path to where the devices should be copied to. Alright, a lot of reading in this module. Um, should be copied to. So there we go. So the next part is installing grub legacy from a grub shell. Let me see what I'm at here. I'm almost at the 1 hour mark. So this is a particularly long one. So I'm gonna try to get through at least another 6 minutes. Want to get to that magical 1 hour mark. And then I think I gotta hang it up. So next section, installing grub legacy from a grub shell. If you cannot boot the system for some reason and need to reinstall grub legacy, you can do so from the grub shell on a grub legacy boot disk. From the grub shell, type C at the boot menu to get the grub prompt. The first step is to set the boot device, which contains /boot, the /boot directory. For example, if this directory is in the first partition of the first disk, the command would be root space open round brace sd 0,0 round brace. Open and close round braces. If you do not know which device contains the /boot directory, you can ask grub to search for it with the find command like below. So find space /boot /grub /stage1. I don't know why they have stage 1 in there. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know why they have /grub or /stage1 because we're trying to find the device that contains the /boot directory. So I would think that the command would be find space /boot, and you wouldn't need /grub /stage1. That's confusing to me. So you know what? I'm gonna ask the AI. I love this AI so much. This is everything. Okay, so I'm gonna say, why is the command not simply find space /boot? Why is the /grub /stage1 part of the command necessary? Alright, so apologies for any confusion required. You are correct. The command find /boot would also work to locate the device that contains the /boot directory. The /grub /stage1 part in the command is not necessary in this case. So it looks like kind of a... So however, specifying the /grub /stage1 in the command narrows down the search specifically to the location of grub's stage1 file within the /boot directory. The stage1 file is an important component of the grub bootloader, responsible for initiating the boot process. By including /grub /stage1 in the command, you're asking grub to find the device that contains the stage1 file within the /boot directory. This can be helpful if you specifically want to identify the device and partition that holds the grub bootloader files. So to clarify, the command find /boot would search for the /boot directory on all devices and partitions, while find /boot /grub /stage1 would specifically search for the device containing the stage1 file within the /boot /grub directory, which is important to find because the stage1 file is an important component of the grub bootloader, Grand Unified Bootloader, responsible for initiating the boot process. Okay, so then set the boot partition as instructed above, and use the setup command to install grub legacy to the MBR. So this is a BIOS system. and copy the files, the needed files to the disk. This is, which I think we're talking about. Yeah, we're talking about legacy grubs. So legacy system is more likely to be BIOS based. When finished, reboot the system and it should boot normally. Alright, next section, configuring grub legacy menu entries and settings. And I am just now past the 1 hour mark. This is a pretty long section. And then after that is the exercises, which can take quite a bit of time. So that's going to be it for this video. Hit that magical 1 hour mark. Yeah, thanks for watching. I hope the audio was halfway decent this time. Still trying to get that worked out. Yeah, and as I said, you can always use that extension that I showed before, this Ask GPT I showed in another video. Get a summary of it, ask it questions based on what's in the video, and then you can click these 3 dots and go to show transcript and get a transcript regardless of my audio quality. So yep, that's it. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.